So, first thing you have to do again is you have to do a do now. And now you're all writing down the question and the answer. And what I want you to do during your presentation is, what do I do during the do now? What do I do? Do I tell people to raise their hands? How do I do a do now normally? Yep. I do what's called cold call mostly. What does that mean?
You just randomly call them.
I randomly call on people. So when you do your do now question, what can you do? You can randomly call on people. Don't always call on the same person, but you can randomly call on people. Sometimes I do I need 5 hands. You can do that one as well if you want. Anything that I do in front of the class, you can do, like for a strategy. So let's just try that real quick here. So what is the best part of our schools today? And I'll have to point to the videotaping right now. So go ahead.
The best part of our schools today is that I feel like we have better textbooks and like better technology or something, so it can help us study more.
Excellent. Better textbooks, better technology. Good answer. Let's go with right over here. Go ahead.
For the best part?
Yep.
The best part is the support the teachers give us on anything that we don't understand or we need help on.
Okay, very good. Let's do one more right here. Best part.
Teachers help you be more organized in school.
Okay, excellent. Now what's the worst part, be honest? Yes?
Okay, well, not necessarily in the schools, I think in other schools, like, they focus more on, like, disciplinary and stuff because kids are acting out in class.
Ooh, lots of disciplinary rules and places to go when you do discipline and how many detentions, how many suspensions, all that.
Yeah, like, 'cause, like, they're worried about what the kids are doing in class rather than
Okay, but more focused on behavior than learning. I like that. Let's go on the back corner right over there. Sorry, I'm not going to use names. Go ahead.
I guess I put that the worst part is like the hours, like school's really long.
Okay, yeah, it is a pretty long day. All right, now how many people did I call on? Just for you to know. If you want to write notes on the side, you can for when you do your presentation. I called on about 3 people for each part of this one. So call on somewhere between, let's say, 2 and 5 people for your do now. And try to make it open-ended. Do you want your do now to have one answer? Does this have one answer? Many people can say many different things, so a good do now is like a deep thinking question that you could argue. But it's got to be about your theme, and my theme is education. So let's keep going. All right, there's my title slide. Medieval Education, of course, it's the best group ever. You'll write your names down here when you give your presentation. History 101, I just like to put that in there, you don't have to. So Medieval Education, that's the title, and that's, you write that down for number 2, correct? So you'll write that down. Here's where it's going to be a little awkward when you're giving a presentation, because here's where you just kind of got to be quiet and stand in front of everybody. So this might be a little awkward, but it'll be okay. And just have one person say the title slide. Obviously, this is one that takes about 2 seconds. So Medieval Education, I will now move on. Oh, and also, by the way, look at everyone when they're writing. What I usually do is when I see about half the people are still writing, I say, okay, about 10 seconds. Why don't I wait till every single person's done? Because it might take too long, and I hate to have some people miss it, but I wait till about half the people are done, then I say, okay, about 10 seconds, and sometimes I even do a countdown. You can do that in your presentation if you want. All right, so essential question and standard. Here I just read them out loud. The essential question, what forms of education existed and who had access to it? And then the standard is identify forms of education in medieval Europe and explain who had access to it. Now in your packets, I believe the standard is there. You just have to write down the essential question, correct? All right, you may write that down. What I also like to do during a PowerPoint presentation is I don't like to stay in one spot. It's going to be hard to hear me now, so I'll talk loud. But I like to walk around the room because what does that do to people when they're paying attention? If I walk by you, is it harder to not pay attention or do something else? So I think a good teacher, a good presenter is mobile, which means you should be moving around when you're talking. You can do that. And that means you're actually going to have to practice your presentation. You're going to have to say it out loud in front of your group and in front of other people. Maybe even say it in front of the mirror or something. I know it seems kind of awkward. All of you have smartphones. You could even give your presentation at home and do what? You could record it and then listen to it and go, does that sound good at all? I know it's hard to hear your own voice, but I would recommend doing that. So let's keep going. All right, now the first slide. Here's where I'm just going to give information, and now I'm going to give you that information just like I would. What do you have to do in your packets? There's the first slide. Is it already there for you? Education for the rich. And now I'm going to talk. We first have the summary statement up here. This is like the topic sentence. You can copy this part down word for word. That's fine. But you will have to make a summary sentence for each of your PowerPoint slides. You will make it. And how many words does it have to be? Between 5 and 12 words, no more. If you have a PowerPoint presentation and has more words, if this is more than 12, you will not pass the PowerPoint presentation. So whoever gives this slide, they are responsible for the words being on there. So whoever's speaking, they're also responsible for the slide. Bless you. So, medieval education was mostly for the rich. Now, education had to be paid for in medieval Europe. And it was really, really expensive. So medieval peasants is another word for poor people. So medieval peasants could not pay the fees, which meant the poor were basically unable to pay for any kind of education. So this left it just for the rich. Most educated people, many educated people also worked in the church, however. They worked in the monasteries. So another way you could be educated would be to join a church monastery. This might mean becoming a priest potentially. Although oftentimes priests were from more of the rich families. This could be becoming like a Christian brother or a monk, where you would have to kind of give up your family. But you were able to live in a community, you were able to read, you were able to become educated. If you were a nun, they were the most educated women in medieval Europe by far. Nuns were the most educated women. And actually it's kind of funny, even till about almost 100 years ago, well no, actually about till like, I think it was even like in the 1960s and 70s, it was something like 30 to 40% of college professors were nuns because they were able to become educated. So, women were able to become educated if they went in the monastery. However, you lived an isolated life. So if you were a brother, if you were a monk, you could become educated. If you were a nun, you could become educated. Otherwise, it was just the rich people who were able to afford the education, and the poor peasants, they couldn't afford an education, so they were not able to get one. And also there were very, very, very few books that were in Europe at this time. So in the medieval world, you had the rich on top, very educated. The poor were not educated, but the only way they could become educated was how? Church. If they decided to live a life in the church, live in the monastery. And the monks, the brothers, the nuns were some of the most educated people in Europe at this time. Did I say some things more than once? Why did I do that? And what does it give you the ability to do? To write down. A good presentation is not just your facts. If I come up here and speak super fast and say a whole lot, but no one can write it down, have I given a good presentation? No. So you have to stop. You have to say things maybe more than once, your main points. Was that about good? Were you guys able to get notes down for it? All right, let's move on. Now, the second slide. Developing society and common language. This would probably be where another person would come in and start speaking. The summary statement. As trade increased, education needed to increase, and there needed to be a common language. This common language was Latin. So basically, trade starts increasing in the world. There becomes these business people, or these merchants. And they start trading with other people. And because of that, when you start trading, you need to write things down. And you have to be able to speak in the same language. So the business language of medieval Europe was Latin. So in medieval Europe, many people spoke Latin. So as medieval England, for example, was developing, there needed to be more educated people. So what happens is the important trading towns realize this. So if you become a merchant or a trader and you have kids, well, your sons would go to school, the daughters wouldn't. So they started to make these grammar schools. So trading towns start to build these grammar schools that are only for the boys. And the reason is because they want the boys to become educated so they can become traders. And the one thing they're going to need to know really well is how to speak Latin. So Latin becomes the trade language. It's incredibly important. You can go from town to town to town all over Europe and you can speak Latin. A text connection for today. Now, you make text connections in your presentation. What's that going to give you the ability to get? A 3.5, maybe even a 4, probably a 3.5. I'll talk about the 4.0 a little later. So, a text connection for today. What's the trade language of the world today? No matter where you are in the world, if you learn this language, you could probably do business, global business. Yep. Chinese, maybe in the future. English right now. Yeah, we're going to say what? Yeah, English is the trade language today. If you're growing up in a small village somewhere in the world and you learn how to speak English really well, do you have a better chance of getting a good job? Well, definitely. You definitely get a better chance of getting a much better job. So, English is kind of like the trade language of today. And it used to be Latin. I'll tell you how important English is. If you guys graduate from college and you're fluent English speakers, you could go to China and get a job teaching English and make good money. Not even having a teaching degree. If you have a college degree and can speak English, there are jobs for you all over the world teaching English. Why? Because people want to learn English so they can go into business. This is a text connection. This is what Latin was like in medieval Europe. Does that make sense? So what happens is they would teach the boys how to speak Latin so they could trade. So the girls could not be sent to school, though. The girls could not be sent to school. The books were too expensive, so the lessons were taught in a way where they had to learn information by heart and they had to memorize. So everything had to be memorized because they didn't have books. Everything had to be memorized. By 1500, 1500, by 1500, many large towns had grammar schools. So by 1500, many large towns had grammar schools. These schools were very small. Many just had one room for all the boys and one teacher. So a school would have one room for all the boys and one teacher who had a religious background. The teacher would teach the older boys who were then responsible for teaching the younger ones. You brought up the long day. The lessons started at sunrise and would finish at sunset. This meant during the spring and summer, the days were very long, but in the winter, the days were very short. Why would that be the case? What did they have?
Light.
Yeah, there wasn't lighting in the school. So in summer, you'd have long days of teaching. In the spring, long days. And in the winter, the days would be very, very short. Discipline was strict and often had physical punishment. So the discipline was very strict and often had physical punishment. Actually,